I do remember it was just always something that interested me, people's stories. And I grew up as a third culture kid, and that was very much a big piece of my upbringing. And so it was interesting to have you question me about what's my backstory, because I hadn't really woven it into the third culture kid piece of it, or the expat piece. But I do think as an expat, we're always inclined to want to know the stories of the people around us, of the country around us, of what our surroundings are. From an early age, we started living overseas when I was 3, navigating nursery school in a different language. And then I spent additional time overseas in high school. And so I think I always had that inclination to want to know more about the people around me, maybe because I was transitioning and having to create new communities and I didn't always know the people around me. So I think there might have been kind of a skill set that you have to adapt as an expat. You have to be interested in learning and knowing where you sit in order to adapt. And so perhaps that's part of it. I don't know. I was a psychology major in college as well, and that always interested me. So I had some great professors undergrad. That might have been it too. Well, you can get a master's in social work, and there's many different tracks for it. I knew what I wanted to study was clinical social work, which would allow me to do therapy. And so I went to and got my master's at the oldest university that offers clinical social work as a degree. And so it was very clinically heavy. So it was all about how do you engage with people who are struggling with different types of issues. And I always knew that's what I wanted to do. Other social work tracks can include kind of an organizational and advocacy, kind of public policy track. There's lots of different things, but I always knew that I wanted to do therapy. And specifically when I started, I wanted to work with children and families. And then I broadened my perspective from there over the years. No, I don't. I think there are a lot of things that helps to be an expat, but I wouldn't put clinical social worker on my very short list of that. Maybe to some extent, um, and I think it was more something that I wanted to adapt wherever we lived. Was trying to figure out a way that I could do my professional work, and for me, that was something that was really meaningful. I think for a lot of expats, they people have different things that they want to have meaning in. For me, it was always important that I be able to do some professional work. So I think to some extent, I applied that lens to my expat experience. For example, when we lived in places like Panama, I couldn't practice. So that's where I ended up working in a job that allowed for more kind of clinical intervention on an organizational level. And that was something that I could legally do in Panama. I think that everyone as an expat brings specific things that are on their reasons of why they want to do this or are going to serve them best. I don't think it's attractive to my ability to be an expat, but it certainly was very specific to me and not. I think there are a lot of other things that might have helped in um, how to navigate being an expat, not just my background. I think to start, the expat mental health issues that we really hear about are interestingly very parallel and similar to the ones that we hear about in our brick and mortar practices. A lot of low level depression, a lot of anxiety, a lot of isolation and loneliness. And these are things that are unique not to an expat community. I think we see this more within our own host countries, certainly during the pandemic. I think the difference is that as an expat, people are more inclined to come into care a little bit earlier because typically when someone might be feeling a little depressed or a little bit anxious, they have a realm, a big continuum of coping skills they can implement that might include spending time with their girlfriends or family members, or maybe going for a run and exercise, or I don't know. When I lived in Virginia, it was great to go to Target for a couple of hours just to kind of zone out and see what was going on. And that's not something that I have access to none of those things. Or right when we move, we might not have access to any of those things. We don't know where the safe running routes are. We might not have friends yet. We might have to adjust and recalibrate how we stay in touch with our family members. There might not be a Target. So I think that to that degree, people are more apt to come in for care a little bit earlier because their coping skills, they don't have access to the same ones. So they might be a little bit sooner to come in and seek support in therapy. I think that most specifically, probably there's the change related to the pandemic. And I think there's two pieces there. One, I think that therapy has become much more mainstream. Many more people are inclined to access care and support in therapy. And the second piece for our work with Truman Group, it's always been remote, long before the pandemic. And so the pandemic itself didn't necessitate a huge transition of our workforce. We were always remote. And so, but I do think that's come out of the pandemic is the normalization of remote care. I think that people are much more inclined. I used to have a lot of conversations about how do you navigate the site that we use, or does it really work? And I find that we're not having those conversations. But clearly, remote care is something that does work. There were studies that spoke to this long before the pandemic, but I think with the high rate of utilization, it's a much more accepted form of clinical care. I think that a lot of what you've outlined, Hunter, already works really well. And I love the idea of knowing really clearly why you're doing it and being able to keep that perspective. I think it's also really important to adjust that narrative or that story for yourself. So whatever the reason might be that you're moving to another country and going to live this expat lifestyle, figuring out ways for it to work for you. So I remember what feels like a million years ago when we first moved overseas with a young family. It was really challenging. Our first move was all about my spouse's job. And there were times that it was difficult, and it was very easy to fall into a support group with other people, other notably spouses, where it was all about the other person's work. And what can happen over time is then you all end up just complaining about how it's all about the other person's work and you don't really like being an expat, and that can be a dangerous slope. So I think it's really nice to buffer it and figure out another story in that. So my story is I ended up being friends with another person who was in a similar scenario where this person also was a spouse and they had young kids, and I had my regular, like, it's just so hard. I don't know how I'm ever going to work. And it's all about my spouse's job. And she said to me, I get that, but I actually kind of love being an expat because I don't have to work. I'm finally in a position where we're able to take a little bit of time off where I can not have the same, I don't have to have the same earning power. And we purposefully did this. And what it allows me is being able to stay at home with our little kids for a couple or more, I think she had framed it as like 9 more months than I would have if you're in the US. And it was so helpful to have that perspective that I don't know, I think I would have gotten there. I'd like to think I would have gotten there on my own, but in that moment I might not have. And so I think it's also important to complement knowing your why and then being able to be consciously surrounding yourself with elements that are going to make that work. If you go to your local coffee shop and you don't speak the language and every morning that person's really mean because you don't speak the language, try another coffee shop. If and just figuring out small pieces during your day that are going to enable you to feel better about being wherever you're at, because some days are going to be really hard. What can be helpful, and someone recommended this to me a few moves ago, where you land in country, and actually someone said to me, pull out your calendar, and this is back, I still have a paper calendar, and put a big red circle out 90 days from today. And to really just stay in a place where you are absorbing information about what you love, what you don't love, but don't even ask yourself about the generalized question of, are you glad you moved? Or do you like it in this new country? Just allow yourself at least 90 days of walking in this new space that you're at before you even make an evaluated judgment about what it feels like to live there. Did you do the right thing or not? Because otherwise you'll drive yourself crazy and you'll love it one morning and then 20 minutes later you stepped in dog poop on the street and you don't love it anymore, and then 27 minutes later something else happened, your kid finds a new type of swing on the playground and then it's great again. And it will feel like such a roller coaster that instead when you land, if you can just think 90 days from now, I'm going to really evaluate what I love about it and what I don't love, and then see where that nets out. Just giving yourself a little bit of time rather than the constant query of, did I do the right thing? Do I like this new country? Should I have left my old country? Just allowing yourself that space. Traveling, in my own experience, and I think this will resonate with other expats. I think that there are wonderful things about traveling with kids because your family unit is that much closer. This is our first tour where we have some young adult children in the States, and man, is it hard because I miss them more and they're so far away. And so I think when you're all in one place, it's really nice. You have less change because you're not separated. And all of that is great as long as your kids are having a great time. If you're traveling on your expat experience with children and they're not doing as well, then that's going to be an added stressor. And so I guess the one thing I would say, and much of it depends on the age of kids, but I would say even upwards of 18, they're going to take a lot of their guidance from you. In that if you love where you live, they're more likely to love it. If you get there and you can't find a moist cookie and it's really hard and people are mean, then they're probably not going to like it. So I just think if you are traveling with kids, it's really important to be aware as to what's going on for them. It's really important to figure out a way to be a part of their community if they're going to school and to know their friends so you understand the context when they talk about it. And it's totally fine to agree with them about the challenges, but to be really mindful of that your experience is going to affect them and how you communicate that. So when it comes to consultation with other providers, it really depends again on each individual client. But what I would say is anytime people come in for care and therapy and they're also taking medication for mental health purposes, even if it's just sleep, or let's say it's low level anxiety or depression, we always like to be able to consult with prescribing doctors. Because if you think about it, we're all treating the same thing. So that really is the highest standard of care. If you have a doctor treating you for anxiety and you're also meeting with a therapist, I would hope those two people are talking to each other as they should be. In terms of the consultation that can happen, I found that because we're a part of a remote care practice, it's actually easier than ever because it's very easy for docs to be able to just sign up and do a remote half hour of consultation. I know we used to do this over the phone, but for some reason I don't really understand. It's easier remotely. And we do a lot of consultation. At Truman Group, we just do therapy. We don't do telepsychiatry. We don't do any kind of prescription medication. And so we rely heavily on consultation, not only with psychiatrists or with regular doctors. Sometimes we'll do that if we're treating kids and teens. It's helpful to be able to consult with the school counselors. Oftentimes we might have a parent who's living away from the family for a year because of a military assignment. That's when, again, the remote consultation is great to be able to dial that parent into a family session. And so we do a ton of consultation. It's all really helpful in providing the care that we do, and it makes us much more informed. And I like to think the other providers as well, where we're all working with one client. So the cultural adjustment cycle really, again, it varies by every individual. And what it speaks to is that the process of cultural adjustment, there is a process to it. There is a cycle to it. And it can look like a number of different things. It can look like people coming into a culture or a new country. And typically what will happen is it's like a honeymoon. Everything's so fantastic. The water tastes better. The air is clear. And you kind of fall in love with this new place because we also kind of need to justify to ourselves that we just went through this move. And so there's typically very much of a honeymoon phase. And then there's a drop. And usually that drop happens somewhere between 4 to 12 weeks. It really depends. For some folks who are surrounded by family members where life hasn't changed that markedly, the honeymoon phase lasts much longer. There are other folks who about 3 days in, everything has gone wrong, and the honeymoon phase is incredibly short. So all it is just a period of time. And then there's a bit of a drop. And then because we are resilient people, all humans, we figure out a way to kind of move through that. And it's almost a little bit, there's a period of acceptance that happens. Almost in some ways, not in the same way as there is grief, but in the same way that we allow that things are different. And that rather than, again, every Sunday morning that you can't find a good bagel. This has happened. I live in El Salvador. Maybe something comes out of that. Maybe you find a different kind of pastry, or maybe you learn how to make bagels yourself, which actually is a really fun skill, and it's not nearly as hard as everyone thinks. So the point is, and then once you get through that acceptance place, then things feel better. You still miss home. You still might mourn a lot of the loss from what you left behind, but things seem to feel more like home where you're at. And it moves into a place that's a little bit more integrated in terms of allowing for what you've lost and then finding new places to fill in with what you gained from this new place where you live. I think I'm hesitant to say what the issues are going to be because we take such an individual approach to each and every client, and I'm always surprised. So, in some ways, when the pandemic happened, what I was really struck by is all of my clients who I was seeing who were managing kind of low level anxiety, they were doing great during the pandemic initially because all of a sudden there was an external focus as to why they were so anxious. And so, in many ways, I think that there's not going to be, I'm sure that people can speak to trends. I'm less inclined to speak to trends really because our approach is each and every client individually. So I can say, yes, we certainly see a number of adults and teens who are now returning to the workplace or returning to school, and it's kicking up a lot of anxiety or concern really for health related um, concerns if they're living in areas where there's not high vaccination rates or there's still a lot of Delta variant breaking through places. So we certainly see an uptick in anxiety. We also can see an uptick in low mood and depression because it just keeps going on and on and on. At the same time, I would also say I just met with a teen this morning who's feeling so much better because all of a sudden he is able to see some of his friends, but he hasn't been able to for the past year and a half. So anytime I think I might note a trend, I am scared to predict anything because I don't know, and all I can do is hop on a screen when someone wants to meet for an intake and then listen to what their story is and figure out a way to try and respond with support, which is independent and really specific to each individual person.